And we are live. Welcome, Abha, to the next edition of Pakka Nimbu Podcast. Abha is a VP talent at Lightspeed India. LSIP is a venture firm across startups in India and Southeast Asia. They have had about 100 plus investments across various stages of the company. Abha has 12 plus years of consumer and tech leadership exec search experience. She works with early and growth stage founders to hire tech teams. She has hired across marketplace, fintech, edtech, and SaaS domains. Welcome, Abha. Happy to have you here.
Thank you so much, Bhavin, for having me. Really excited to be here.
Today's topic is how can developers and architects and engineering managers, software leaders basically, how can they find fitment? How can they decide whether they are fit to work for a company or not? Today, we are going to focus specifically on early stage startups. Before we dive into the details there, let's take a few minutes to understand various types of companies and various types of personas that you work with from a recruiter's perspective.
Super happy to get into it right away, Bhavin.
Yeah.
I think the way we look at startup hiring is broadly classify stages of startup, which is well known across the ecosystem. We have early stage, growth stage, and late stage. And early stage means companies across seed to Series A, Series B. Growth stage is post Series B to up to Series D, Series E, and later stages Series E and beyond. What we call typically unicorns or pre-IPO companies in that setup as well, right? Having spent so much time working with different startup founders, different stages, we've kind of tried to create archetypes of what works or what is the right kind of leader at what stage. For us, early stage is primarily what we called as the builder persona, right? Where people are very hands-on, they get deep in, they are deep technically, they tend to build smaller teams but very resourceful teams, and essentially end up spending a lot more time working with founders and building the 0 to 1, 1 to 10 kind of journey overall. Post that is what we call the scalar persona from an engineering leadership perspective, right? And what is scalar? Scalar is you've got some part of the product ready, so it's post PMF. You start scaling up your team, so you go from 10, 15, 20 engineers to 50 engineers. So there's a lot more people, process, capability that comes in, and that's what we call it as a scalar. So this is more growth stage. Team starts expanding, you start moving to pod structures, etc., and the capability starts building out, right? And what happens at late stages, you think of more strategic technology leadership, more future thinking. How can the org evolve from a tech roadmap perspective, architecture perspective? There's more complexity. There could be multiple business units that come in, right? And hence you're looking at a CTO, from a leadership perspective. And then you still have like multiple layers with VPs, directors, and a larger 100, 200 member engineering team and beyond, right? So that's broadly how we classify. We are going to be spending more time, as you mentioned, on the early stage, which is what is this builder persona and what happens at early stage hiring.
Yeah. Awesome. That is a very crisp and very clear explanation. So, out of builder, scaler, and leader, we are focusing on builders today.
Yeah.
Um, let's dive right in.
Yeah.
What are the companies looking for? Companies, essentially the founders, when they are hiring at an early stage. So, in other words, what are founders looking for when they are hiring?
I think two types primarily, and I would split what founders are looking for basis their own backgrounds or where they're coming from, right? If the founding team or one of the two or both the founders come from a technical background or himself have been engineers leaders in the past, then initially early stage is more about getting in few smart engineers, 3 5 engineers who are very hands on, can work and take their vision and kind of build the first product live, right? Versus if the founders are non-technical, right? They're both business strategy product folks, but haven't like there's a core gap, technical gap within the founding team. Then we look at a different persona of what could work at early stage, right? It could be a slightly more seasoned, slightly more experienced engineering leader, right? 8 10 years of experience, can lead and work independently, understands long term what needs to be built, very strategic, right? So that kind of starts, or that's kind of the first step that anybody thinks of when they think of early stage hiring, right? What are you looking for? Are you looking for quick 3 5 engineers, mid-level experience, or are you looking for a slightly more seasoned engineering leader? Could be a director, could be a senior architect, could be a principal engineer level, right? And then we kind of go in and deep dive more. Does that
Okay.
help?
Yes, it does. Um, let's focus on probably the category where there is a CTO.
Hmm.
So both the founders are not non-technical, because in that case, even if they are looking for the first or initial few hires,
Hmm.
they'll look for a leader. They'll
Yeah.
probably not look for a builder
Yeah.
in that case.
Yeah.
So since you're talking about builders, let's assume there is a CTO
Hmm.
and the leadership is taken care of.
Okay.
Um, then what is the CTO going to look for? Are those still principal, staff, engineer sort of people?
Yeah. I think at early stage we've seen usually slightly more experienced folks come in. So about 5 to 8 years of experienced folks come in, and the reason that happens is because there's a lot more ambiguity at early stage, right? There
Yeah,
is a lot more um, building that needs to be needs to happen, and hence there is uh, slightly more experienced folks who can kind of work with ambiguity, deal with different challenges, work on projects independently is what is helpful, right? So you're basically looking for experienced folks, 5 to 8 years of experience. You're looking for more full stack engineers, stronger back end folks who can kind of work on different problem statements. You're looking for people who are resourceful, who've been part of larger organizations or part of smaller organizations, but done the 0 to 1 in their thinking in terms of taking up new projects. So kind of can work in a resourceful manner. And you're looking for folks who are very, very hands on, right? And we can maybe walk through each of these in detail. But yeah, that's primarily what you're thinking of.
yeah. Let's walk through them in detail. Would love to know your expanded thoughts.
So I
Let's
think
double click.
as we kind of define these 4 areas, like we said, right, we're looking for 5 to 8 years of experience. When we're looking for this experience, we're primarily looking for people who've been exposed to startups, right? Startups is a very different ballgame as compared to large companies, right?
Right.
Which means they worked with founders, they worked with different business leaders. They have worked on projects which were from idea to launch, right? And this could be in a large company setup also, but the idea to launch, which is the 0 to 1 of taking in a new business vertical, you could be in in a marketplace setup and you're completely launching a newer category or a new business line, right? That's the 0 to 1 of a project, right? So people who have taken or done a lot of these 0 to 1 projects, initiatives, even in a larger company context, or been exposed to startups is what from an experience perspective works, right? I don't think we are prioritizing a lot more for technical depth. Like it's good to have certain skills, certain languages where the intent of the platform is. But at early stage, sometimes it's so early that even the founders are thinking about what's the right tech stack to build on, right? So I
Right.
don't think we're focusing a lot more on understanding specific languages, but the ability to be hands-on to code when required is very, very important for these first few engineers, right? People
Right.
who genuinely enjoy coding, even though they're in a people management role today, managing 10 engineers, but who on the side like doing projects or pick up one project and then still manage the team is ideally what works very, very well here, right? So people who enjoy coding, who keep trying on new languages, ideally full stack, have had a big mix of both front end and back end experience, as well as who've done these 0 to 1 projects is very, very helpful.
So rather than the depth, you are optimizing for breadth. The more breadth they have, the better.
Yeah,
If it's
yeah,
just backend, multiple languages, or it's backend plus front end,
yeah,
various frameworks, or it's plus DevOps, you can do some deployments, infrastructure,
yeah,
etc. Yeah, more the
yeah,
better.
yeah. I think that plus I think here you're looking at some level of system design experience as well. And that's why I said 5 to 8 years of experience, because you want people to kind of go in and do that well as well, right?
Right.
And that's why I say hands-on, right? We obviously not at this stage assessing too much of coding abilities, but we're
Yeah.
testing system design, right? Ability to take a problem, breaking down into smaller components, build it with capability, and then build it in a hands-on manner is what founders as well as people like us are kind of thinking about.
Do you index on the decision making capability? I mean, decision making and just moving on rather than getting blocked can come in two ways. Either you know, or you're rowdy enough to just
Yeah,
like take a call and then move on.
yeah.
Do either of them work? Is one of them negative?
I think here we are not looking for a perfectionist, right? Perfectionist comes at the scaling stage, right? You're looking at
Yeah.
someone who is is able to iterate a lot more, right? So if you get stuck on something or from a decision making perspective, see what needs to be built, build a hacky solution, and then scale it up, right? At this stage, speed is of utmost importance, right? The way startups are growing today, I think speed becomes priority. So someone who builds with the right intent but is not a perfectionist, understands that that needs to be built at a certain stage. And that's why I'm saying the 0 to 1 experience is always a more hacky experience versus the 10 to 100 experience, right? Because there you're
Right.
building for perfection, for scale. You can't afford to have that. At early stage, you can still have a slightly more hacky and a more iterative solution. You build a version 1, a version 2, a version 3, and then kind of keep expanding on that, right? So I think you prioritizing for that decision making pace and hustle early on.
Awesome. Okay. Also, you kept saying that it is the 5 to 8 years experienced band that you are hiring at. Does it mean, I think 0 to 2 is a lot harder to get hired into the startups, but how about 2 to 4, 2 to 5 years experienced who haven't had exposure to system design as much, but they are still ferocious coders. They can just produce code at lightning speed, and then they have a lot of fire in the belly to grow and
Yeah.
learn. How
Yeah.
about those folks?
I think obviously we do end up appointing a bunch of those as well that come in through our ecosystem as well. I think there it's always a two in a box kind of a solution, right? You still need the senior person, and then you could still have a smart 3-year-old engineering folk, very very strong technically on say the back end right now, right? Or very very strong on certain components, right? So you would still look in for those. It'll always be a solution together. I wouldn't say it's sequentially to say first you hire the IC, then you hire it, because engineering hiring can be very very complex. So if you do end up getting a very very smart coder, we do encourage founders to kind of bring them on board and start getting them into the ecosystem as well. But yeah, I think we prioritize there for people who are coming in from a network and from a reference perspective, right? Someone says very very smart coder, very hands on, wants to do early stage, will disrupt, some signal that we keep picking up, and then we say okay, let's have a chat, let's figure out where can we kind of which kind of a startup would be the ideal fit for him, and then kind of plug and play. But I would say that would still be a mix of two, an IC plus a very smart software folk.
Okay, sounds good. This is a good comprehensive overview of the tech requirements and the tech fitment. How about the non-tech fitment? What do you look for in the temperament, in the risk-taking ability? Um, yeah.
I would break it down into four parts of it, right? Overall, there are four things that we would look at that we hiring any tech person or tech leader or a IC or a director, whatever level you want. We want to break it into four parts of it, right? We one are saying ability to connect to business or business acumen, right? This is also very very important for early stage, even for growth stage and later stage as well, right? I think for startups, what can tech solve? How does tech impact? How do you drive growth through technology? Ability to understand business and then prioritize what to build is very very important as well here, right? So I would say um, the first pillar becomes just ability to understand and have some connect from a business perspective, right? And I usually personally end up liking or having much stronger conversations with engineering folks who are very business oriented, right? Can create or directly correlate, this is what I was building, this is the impact on the solution or the product or the company that happened, right? So I think the first pillar is strong business understanding or ability to even at least start having some of those conversations. An early engineer may not be able to do that, but at least like there's some intent at the back to kind of articulate that is very very important for us, right? Which is business connect or business acumen, right? We've already discussed the second piece, which is the technical depth, right? The
Mhm.
third would be cultural fitment, right? And when we say cultural fitment, obviously it varies startup to startup, but primarily we've seen 3-4 buckets that keep coming out of it every time we have
Mhm.
conversations with founders, right? Like I said, hands-on ability to code, likes to code, can spend hours coding and looking at solutions, right? People who are problem solvers, right? Who don't get stuck up or not looking for solutions to top down, right? Are innovative to identify solutions, right? Low ego. Early on, you don't want people with any kind of ego, right? It's not my way or the highway kind of approach here, right? So people who have low ego works very well, right? Maturity in terms of being able to deal with founders, different stakeholders, because here it's a smaller team. You could be interacting with product, with business, with sales, whichever function that kind of you're operating with, right? So maturity to kind of deal with some of those, and that's where maturity and low ego becomes kind of one bucket, right? And the last I said was the appetite for just quick launches, moving fast, pace is what you're thinking of, right? These are something which are slightly more standard across all startups, right? That's more cultural fitment, right? Because in terms of what works, and the last bucket is more team and people management, which I can come to later as well, which is more about building and attracting talent. Even if you're a 8 years experience person, you would still need 3, 4, 5 engineers, right? So the ability to kind of attract talent, work and kind of hire your first few team with the founders is also going to be equally important. So broadly, these 4 buckets, but from a cultural perspective, I would say, like I mentioned, low ego, maturity, very hands-on and resourceful in that matter, and appetite for speed and execution orientation.
Okay, that's a very very comprehensive list. I think the negative side of these questions also got answered, which is like what are the wrong personas who shouldn't join the startups.
Hmm.
So not worth reiterating, but do you want to take probably an anonymous example or two, which were failed hires, where either you hired them in the company and then they left within a few weeks or a few months, or some other undesirable consequences that you did not foresee, but they nonetheless happened, and they added to your recruiting model. Uh, any such examples worth sharing?
I think initial few days there were a couple more. I think not so much in the past 2, 3 years, because I think we've also gotten
Mhm.
experience. I think I mentioned the 3 archetypes initially, right? I think the failed examples come in hiring those archetypes early on, right? If you
Wow.
hire a sailor at the build stage who's very people process and not hands on, it's a big disaster for success, right? Because you're not getting in someone who's working with the team and helping you build the tech strategy and roadmap and also being hands on, but you're building in someone who's hiring more. And we saw a bunch of those examples in the ecosystem overall as well, right? Companies early on scaled faster, built in larger teams, and hence when market kind of became difficult, they had to kind of restructure, reorganize as well, right? So I would say it's not so much of saying a company or a person which is a misfit. It's more the experience and the archetype which becomes a misfit, right? Hiring a CTO early on as well, like um, as early as Series B can also be, a slightly recipe for disaster, right? Because you're thinking long term, but you're still very, very early in your 20-member engineering team. You're still thinking on very basics of how do I increase my org productivity? What should be my team structure? Should I move into pod? Should I not have pod structures? I think some of those questions, which are very stage relevant and not having the right experience may come in front, I think is what is not work for us. And we've seen examples of these in startups in 2019, 20 during the COVID wave, right? When everybody kind of went on a scale up spree and kind of wanting to build. And I think that's where
Yeah.
working with founders and also coaching founders becomes very important. While aspirationally you would want that leader, but that's not the right stage. So helping founders understand and then kind of also like breaking into the types of what we discussed to say this is what needs to work right now, right? And hence is what I would focus a lot more on at, or I would say, which is not a good fit early on.
Awesome. I think this gives me the perfect segue into the next question. See, till now we have talked about the candidate fitment, whether a candidate is right or not so right with certain situations. Let's talk about founder fitments. I mean, eventually it's a combination of two. A company is hiring candidates. So, what are some wrong companies? What are companies that even Lightspeed filters out and you refuse to work with? So, what are the bad founders and bad companies? How can candidates identify them? Any thoughts on that front?
I wouldn't say bad companies, like it's too negative, but I would say I think for early stage, whoever is coming in at early stage, and this is slightly valid for anybody, whether it's an engineering product person or a product person or a business folk who joins in. I think one is fundamentally understanding and believing, do you connect with the category or not, right? What are you solving for from a problem statement? At early stage, people are genuinely passionately curious about wanting to build that. It could be a health tech startup, it could be a AI generative AI startup, right? It could be an ed tech startup, and that could personally come from your own experiences, and that's why you think this is a problem I have faced, or I have heard of, or someone in my family has faced, or this I just passionately kind of understand and hence want to kind of. So I think it's a very personal preference of what quantifies as good or something that you want to put in as your areas of interest versus bad.
Hmm.
And I would say again, people do have specifics. People end up saying that I don't want to work in fintech. Okay, I don't want to work in commerce. I prefer to do something which is more tangible or which is, disrupting at a platform layer versus something building for the consumer. So I think it's there's no good or bad in this case, but it's basically understanding what what areas generally seem exciting to you, and which problems do you want to solve for at early stage, which is what becomes exciting, right? And from a founder perspective, I think again
Hmm.
it's very important to understand what are the founder journeys, right? How have they evolved? Why did they think about starting this company, right? It's essentially that culture match that happens, right? Do you know at that stage it's less about, do you see potential in the business, do you see potential in the founder, can he scale this business up, what is the market opportunity, right? Which I think everybody should think about, right? Is this a big enough problem to be solved? Is this a big enough market, and hence is this the right founder? These are questions that we also obviously address at our end as well, right? But I think even for anybody who joins, these are some questions that you should be curious about, um, and maybe ask and probe, right, as to why did you pick up this category, or why did you pick up this, where do you see potential, what's the plan for the next 12, 18, 24 months, like get a sense of how the founder is thinking. And in the meanwhile, you build your own assessment of founder. How is his working style? How does he operate? Is he himself like, hands on? Is he low ego? If that's your persona, then you say, okay, I understand and I gel with this person. I could see myself fitting in well, right? Early stage is usually a longer term play, right? We expect people to come in at early stage for 3 to 4 years, right? So some of these conversations become very, very important. And I encourage both founders as well as engineers to spend as much time, meet in person, spend a day at the office, brainstorm together, speak to people in your own network, speak to investors maybe who have invested, even if it's pre-investment stage, just build a view on the category from your own perspective to understand, is this something that I would want to be part of for 3 to 4 years, and do I see where I can
Hmm.
add value? I think that's important to understand. So I wouldn't say it's a bad segment, but it's just how you spend time and understand the founders very well.
Right. Um, Meeting and spending a day in office prompts the obvious question: does remote work is even a thing? Like, does it work in early stage companies, or is it de facto working in person to just counter the ambiguity and to add to the speed?
I think at early stage, it may not work, to be honest. It works at slightly scaled setups and growth stage setups, not at early stage, because early things, the pace is so high. Like I said, you could be building a product today and you realize there's potential to build another product, or you kind of repivot.
Hmm.
There's a lot more of this ambiguity that happens. It's a smaller team, so it makes sense to be all together. A lot of your thinking and strategy and decisions are taken on the floor, on the ground together, right? So I think it makes more sense to be working together than working remotely, at least in early stage. Most of our startups are actually all in person, spending time. You could still have a day off here and there to do your own thing, spend time, code. You're siloed where you don't want to get disrupted, but uh, spending time only remote does not work, at least in early stage setups, is what I think of and what I've seen and what we encourage most of our startups as well.
Okay, one more important factor in the fitment is the compensation. Now, a bulk of the early stage startup compensation comes from ESOPs and long term wealth creation. It's the salaries are usually very, very frugal.
Hmm.
Um, and there is a perception that ESOPs are just paper
Hmm.
and they don't really mean a lot, or you're placing a very risky bet.
Hmm.
Um, this, of course, is not completely true, because
Hmm.
if company goes on to do well, you will have your equity get multiplied like
Yeah.
10x, 20x
Yeah.
over a few years.
Yeah.
Um, uh, any thoughts on this area, where how should candidates think about the compensation and the ESOP angle of it
Hmm.
versus the risk that they are taking on?
I think this is one of the most interesting conversations that we have with most candidates as well on compensation, right? And I think it's important to firstly start bringing this conversation early on, right? There are
Yeah.
expectations of what your current numbers are, and of what that potentially could be, and then where does startups look, right? Startups or early stage companies are usually slightly more conservative of cash, right? And that's something which is good to be aware of, I think, for most engineers. However, like I said, it's not that that's make or break, right? If it's a critical role, that's not where how founders also think about it, right? If you need an AI engineer or an ML engineer, or if you need a strong IC persona, you would also create benchmarks, right? So most startups today are well benchmarked of what's in the ecosystem, right? Plus minus 10-20%, right? So it's not significant variance to say if you're earning X, then it'll be half of what you're earning today, right? I think that's one misconception a lot of engineers have early on, right? However, I think it's good to kind of bring in these conversations, maybe post second, third, to say this is where I am in my mind, this is what I'm expecting. I would want to protect 80% of my current fixed numbers, or want to protect 100% of my current fixed numbers, right? And founders will start thinking about what can we do, is that within range early on, versus going through the process and then having those conversations later on and then wasting their time and then everybody else's time as well, right? So I think
Yeah.
one is helping people understand that what is the range that they themselves are more comfortable with. um, I think on the ESOP side, I think ESOPs is fundamentally a significant focus area where most startup founders want to kind of build on. I think they want to always keep it low cash, higher equity, but they're also wanting to then balance it out if there's someone's personal problems to say, I have a loan, I want to keep this much. I have a certain way of living. I want to at least maintain this much, and then so there's always a balance between low cash, high equity, or medium cash and medium equity, right? Which is dependent upon people and their preferences. I think for founders and even for people who are joining or engineers who are joining in early, it's very important to understand how does this ESOP grow over the next 4 years, right?
Hmm.
What is best case projection? What is the worst case market scenario, right? Just given the environment, right? Early
Yeah.
stage, like you rightly said, the multiplier is much much higher, right? You go from a seed to a series A, you anyways go into a 10x of a multiplier, right? Usually a seed company could be anywhere between 30 to 50 million valuation, versus a series A could be 100 150 to 200 depending on the segment and the category, right? So you automatically go in for a 8x to a 10x kind of a multiplier, right? Seed to series A. Similarly, series A to series B, right? So understand the category that you're operating in, what does valuation and multipliers look like basis certain milestones. And again, this is both the responsibility of the founder and for the engineer to understand how does my ESOP grow over the next 3-4 years, right? There is value. Everybody, I mean, there are significant examples now in the ecosystem where people have all made money at different stages. There's been buybacks as companies grow, etc. as well, right? So I think the advantage of coming in early, the multiplier is much higher, and you get a sense of how does this potentially grow over the next couple of years. Like I said, this is always a long-term play. And if you're thinking of monetizing the same in 2 years, it's not going to happen. And that's probably the wrong fitment again. We go back to fitment again. But if it's a 4-year, 5-year plan, you understand how this company will go from seed to series A. What are milestones for series A? What are milestones for series B for this company, right? And asking those questions early on will help you kind of get that visibility, and then also build your own, you know, uh, your own conviction on the founder, the business a little bit better as well.
Okay. The final question is that, see, this is a very complicated process of finding a good company that works for you, finding founders that work for you, that you're comfortable investing a few years of your life in and take on significant risk. That can't be an overnight, 1 month, 1 quarter sort of a thing.
Yeah.
If I'm a professional who is thinking of moving to an early stage startup, what can I do before I decide to quit my current job? I'm pretty sure that's very risky to just quit and then start searching. How can I passively reach out, grow my network? And what are some things that you would advise as a recruiter to a candidate who is looking to join an early stage startup in the next 2 to 3 quarters?
I think just becoming more active in the community. And there are a bunch of events that happen. There's a bunch of hackathons that happen. There are a bunch of mixers that happen in specifically in Bangalore. Like Bangalore is the best place to be any which ways for the wider tech community. But I think just slightly being more out there, meeting founders, meeting your friends who've been in startups, understanding what's working, what's not working, building an outside-in perspective of categories, companies that are building in space, tracking VC funds and investments or segments that they are investing in, just building an outside in perspective of the market, and then just spending a lot more time meeting people. There are these smaller community catch ups, there are smaller, I know a bunch of, uh, company specific ex-employee startups that mixers that keep happening on Fridays in Bangalore, etc. Right. So I think it just depends upon your own ecosystem. Go out, spend more time, meet your friends, meet founders, meet investors or kind of be part of some of these investor meetings when they kind of invite a bunch of people to kind of just come in, network, etc. So just kind of spend more time, understand what segments or what categories are interesting for you, exciting for you. Start building of, I think if you narrow down your focus area as an engineer of what you want to do, your ability to identify what is best for you will become sharper, right? So use the first 2 quarters to maybe just spend time of kind of meeting people and just understanding where do you want to spend the next 4 years of your life, right? What segment, what category, right? So don't take it as a switch, as a one-off conversation to say, okay, I need to
Yeah.
switch now, let's go and say, okay, tech works, okay, fintech works, okay, health tech works for me, or SaaS works for me. But maybe spending time, if I want to spend 4 years of my career next, where do I, what will I get excited about, right? And then kind of going in. And then we've actually seen early engineers, a lot of folks directly reach out to founders and to investors, right? Saying, I want to work for an early stage company. I like these three segments or these three categories. We've also seen people reach out directly. I like what you're building. Can we just meet for a coffee? I think founders are more than happy to kind of spend time and meet for coffee. We are more than happy to meet people or smart engineers in that context as well, right? So I think that helps just building your own perspective of what could be interesting for you and why early stage. I think it's an important question to us, right? Not everybody enjoys early stage. Some people do genuinely enjoy early stage. So I think building your own conviction of why do you want to do early stage is also very important.
Okay, so networking and getting perspectives
Yeah,
from people, not just from articles, etc., is
yeah,
important.
yeah,
Um, uh, from that, I derive that being open is as important. Don't take any of your needs as a taboo that you can't really have this need and you'll be a seen as
yeah,
a bad professional if you are asking for something.
yeah,
Um, and being open about your personal situations, what are you expecting out of life? Maybe you're about to get married, you're 25, 26. Maybe
yeah,
you're looking to buy a house, maybe you already have a loan.
yeah,
Whatever it is, the more open you can be, the
yeah.
more the recruiter and the founders can actually support and help you.
Yeah, I think since you mentioned this, I think it's like you said, honesty and transparency is very important, even when you go through the process, right? Everybody has their own strengths, right? They're very good at X, Y, Z. Like you said, you could be a very sharp technical coder. Maybe you want to work on system design a little bit better, more as well, right? I think it's important to understand your own strengths and have a good assessment of that. And equally for founders, right? To say, I won't say there are gaps, right? At early stage, there are no gaps because everyone is equally at the same level, right? But I think it's more as areas to work upon, right? So if that's a capability that you want to build upon, then you spend more time externally through sessions, through online learning, through working with a mentor, through working with an advisor, right? So I think it's good to be aware of where are strengths and where could be potential blind spots, I would say, or gaps, right? And hence maybe build upon that. And then for everybody to kind of, and even for founders, right? We do it for founders, we do it for engineering leaders, right? He's going to be good at these three things, but this is where we need to support him, right? Or the founder needs to support him, or the investor or the external advisor needs to support him, right? So I think it's important to know those, and that will only come in through transparent conversations about what works, what is motivation, and what are gaps.
Awesome, sounds good. This was a very, very useful and very comprehensive brained up around getting hired in the early stage startup ecosystem. Thank you for that comprehensive treatment, Ava.
But thank you. Lovely connecting with you and lovely being a part of this podcast.